I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a coffee shop in Ville, Tennessee, staring at a photograph on my phone. It was a page torn from the Sunday Crossword. 3 words were circled in red ink. The handwriting was shaky. Arthritis will do that after 78 years. But the message was steady. I'd been waiting 3 years for that signal. My parents spent a decade telling everyone I was unemployed. They mocked me at church suppers. They mocked me at cousin weddings. They mocked me at my own grandmother's birthday party. What they never knew was that I investigate people exactly like them for a living. And my grandmother had just sent me the code. What happened at that Thanksgiving table 30 minutes later ended up in the Ville paper. But before I tell you that part, you need to understand how a family decides one of their own is worth nothing, and what it costs them when they're wrong. Welcome back to Lineage of Lies. My name is Bethany Foster. I'm 34 years old, and I work in Adult Protective Services in Knoxville, Tennessee. My title is Senior Investigator. My job is finding out when older adults are being stolen from, isolated, or manipulated by the people closest to them. I've done it for 10 years. I've recovered money from sons who drained their mother's account, daughters-in-law who forged signatures, nephews who convinced grandma to lend them her pension. In all that time, I'd seen the same pattern over and over. Isolation. Control. Lies dressed up like care. The irony was that my own family didn't know any of that. To them, I was the daughter who left Mville and came back with nothing useful. My mother, Linda, never forgave me for leaving. She got pregnant at 17, dropped out of college, and spent the rest of her life bitter that I had the chance to do what she couldn't. I think, somewhere underneath the anger, she believed my success was a judgment on her choices, so she had to tear it down before anyone else could. My father, Ray, had been a truck driver until his back gave out. After that came bankruptcy, then gambling, then excuses. He wasn't cruel by nature. He was cruel because life cornered him and he never found his way back out. But cruelty, once it becomes habit, doesn't need a reason. And my brother Darren stayed. He stayed in Ville, stayed close to home, stayed loyal to the version of the family that made sense to him. I called him once, early on, and said, "Something's wrong with Grandma's finances." He told me I was paranoid. He said Mom handled everything. I let it go, because I didn't have proof yet. But the one person who really mattered was my grandmother, Helen. Every Sunday when I was a child, Grandma Helen and I sat on her front porch with the newspaper crossword spread between us. She taught 2nd grade for 40 years. She was patient, sharp, and organized down to the last receipt in a shoebox under the sink. She was also the first person who ever believed I could build a life somewhere else. When I was 16, she slipped $500 into my hand after Thanksgiving dinner and told me not to tell my mother. "Your life is yours," she said. "Don't let anyone talk you out of it." I never forgot that. For years, she mailed me crossword pages with one word circled in red. Proud. Brave. Home. That was our language. Then, about 18 months before everything fell apart, our phone calls started changing. Grandma and I used to talk for 40 minutes at a time. Then it became 20. Then 10. "Linda's here," she would say. "I can't talk long." Then one day she said something that made my stomach turn. "They changed my pill, dear. I'm not sure which ones I'm taking anymore. Medication changes. Restricted calls. Missed visits." That's how it starts. I asked if I could come see her. She hesitated. "I'd love that, sweetheart. But you'd better call first." I did call. Linda answered. "She's napping," she said. Then another time, "She doesn't want visitors." Then Darren, "She's fine, Bethany. Mom takes care of everything." I'd heard those lines before in case files. That was the problem. 3 months later, I checked the county records during lunch. Grandma's property tax was overdue for the first time in 51 years. That told me more than any phone call could. I called Grandma's neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, who had known her for decades. She told me the garden was neglected, the gutters were hanging off the roof, and Linda never let Grandma outside anymore. She used to wave at me every morning, she said quietly. Now she just sits in the house. A few days later, Mrs. Calloway got me a 6-month statement from a backup savings account Grandma had opened years ago. She found it tucked inside a Bible in the guest bedroom. 3 withdrawals. $500 each. All taken from an ATM Linda passed on her Wednesday grocery run. That was enough for me to file a third-party report with my supervisor. I told him straight, my grandmother was the victim. The case got assigned to another investigator so there would be no conflict. That kind of handoff is standard, but it still felt like handing someone else the keys to my childhood home. We waited for the full records, and when they came in, I understood why patience matters in this job. 26 months of statements. Grandma's account had once held $131,000. Now it was nearly empty. There were monthly transfers to Ray. There were checks to a fake medical company, a shell set up with an address that traced back to a P.O. box my mother had opened the same month. There were home repair charges for work that had clearly never happened. And there was the cruelest line of all, her arthritis medication had gone unpaid for 3 months. While my parents were spending her money, my grandmother couldn't even afford the medicine that let her close her hands. That night I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the pages until the numbers blurred. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was theft. But to make the case airtight, we needed Grandma herself to speak freely. That's where the crossword came in. Years ago, I had told her about coded emergency messages. Something simple. Something only we would understand if she ever needed help. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Mrs. Calloway texted me a photo. Grandma had hidden a crossword page under her mattress. 3 words were circled in red. Help. Trapped. Call. And 1 more word circled at the bottom. Thanksgiving. That was all I needed. The evidence was ready. The district attorney approved emergency intervention. APS would go in with a deputy on Thanksgiving, while the whole family was gathered at Grandma's house. The morning of the visit, I wore my gray blazer. The one I wore to court. The one that told people this was not a family argument. This was business. At 12:30, 3 of us pulled into the driveway, Janet from APS, Deputy Morris from the sheriff's office, and me. 6 cars were already parked outside. Smoke rose from the chimney. I could smell turkey, stuffing, and something sweet from the kitchen. I knocked on the front door. Darren opened it. His smile disappeared the second he saw me. Then he saw Janet's badge. Then the deputy. His dish towel slid out of his hand and hit the floor. "We need to come in," I said. Inside, the dining room was packed. 22 relatives. Pastor Johnson. Cousins. Aunts. My mother standing at the head of the table with the carving knife in her hand. And at the far end, in a blue church dress, sat Grandma Helen. She looked up at me and smiled. Janet stepped forward and laid the APS notice on the table. "We have an active investigation into the financial exploitation of Helen Foster," she said. "Approximately $127,000 has been withdrawn from her accounts over the past 2 years." The room went still. Janet spread the bank statements across the table like evidence in a courtroom. Ray started talking fast. Helen wanted to help. She gave us permission. Janet didn't even blink. "The power of attorney was signed during a pneumonia hospitalization," she said. "Her property taxes are overdue. Her medication has gone unpaid. The medical company listed on these checks no longer exists." My mother's face turned red. Then she turned on me. "You did this," she snapped. "You called the police on your own mother." I looked at her across that table. "I didn't call the police," I said. "Mom, I am the investigation." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Grandma stood up. Her hand shook, but her voice didn't. I taught second grade for 40 years, she said. I saved every penny I could. I raised my children in this house. And they took everything except my crossword puzzles. That landed harder than any accusation. Darren stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. You tried to tell me, he said quietly. The property tax, the emails. Yes, I said. I was. Deputy Morris then informed Ray and Linda they were being removed pending the investigation. Linda cried. Not because she was sorry. Because she was caught. Ray took a plea deal later. Linda went to trial and was convicted. The money wasn't all recovered. Some of it was gone forever. But the bleeding stopped. Grandma got her accounts back. Her medication was restored. Her property taxes were paid. Mrs. Calloway started checking on her every day. And eventually, Darren came back around. He brought flowers and a crossword book from the dollar store. Grandma made him sit on the porch and finish the first puzzle before she'd let him leave. A few months later, I drove out to Mville again. The garden was alive. The gutters had been replaced. Grandma was on the porch with the paper open in her lap, a pencil resting against her fingers. She tapped a clue and asked, 9 letters. What you build when no one is watching? I smiled. Character, I said. She nodded and filled it in. The people who mock your silence will never understand what you are building inside it. But the ones who need you will always find a way to call. And sometimes, all it takes is 3 words circled in red ink to bring the truth home.